The Fellowship of the Ring, a sleepy summary. As you prepare for rest, let this summary serve as a gentle companion to the world of Middle-earth. This condensed retelling of the Fellowship of the Ring is a soft invitation to explore the full brilliance of J.R.R. Tolkien's original work. While these words offer a calming path to sleep, the true depth of the journey from the Shire to the shadows of Mordor awaits in the richness of the pages themselves. Once upon a time, in a land so thoroughly invented and so lovingly detailed that it feels more real than most places you have actually been, there existed a small corner of the world called the Shire. Now, the Shire is exactly the sort of place you would design if someone asked you to describe the coziest, most tucked away, most resolutely unbothered piece of countryside imaginable. It sits in the northwest of a continent called Middle-earth, which is very old and full of history and languages and quietly devastating lore. But the Shire doesn't really concern itself with any of that. The Shire is rolling green hills and neat hedgerows and little winding lanes that go nowhere important. It is gardens bursting with cabbages and roses. It is post offices and inns and general stores that smell like pipeweed and old wood. It is warm kitchens and ticking clocks and the sound of someone, somewhere, always putting a kettle on. The sky above the Shire is almost always the specific blue of an afternoon that has no plans. The rivers are small and cheerful and reflect the light in a way that seems unnecessarily kind. The whole place hums with a sort of industrious contentment, because the people who live there, the hobbits, are very good at being comfortable and have elevated the practice of staying home into something approaching a high art. Hobbits, if you have not met one, are small. Not alarmingly small, but small in the way that makes a large armchair look exactly right, in the way that makes a round front door set into a hillside seem like a perfectly sensible architectural choice. They tend to be round in the middle and light on their feet, with large, tough, somewhat hairy feet that they never bother to put shoes on, because their soles are as tough as boot leather, and the grass of the Shire is always soft. They have curly hair, usually brown or tawny, and bright eyes, and they laugh easily, and they eat 6 meals a day if they can manage it, which they usually can. They are not, as a rule, interested in adventures. Adventures are things that happen to other people, in other places, and they involve getting wet and going hungry and sleeping on hard ground. And what possible reason could there be for any of that when there is a perfectly good second breakfast available and a fire in the sitting room? Hobbits have been comfortable for a very long time, and they intend to remain so. Our story begins, as so many long and complicated stories do, with a birthday party. The hobbit at the center of this birthday party is a very old, very odd, and very beloved figure named Bilbo Baggins. Bilbo lives in a hole in the ground, but not a nasty, damp, dirty hole full of worms and the smell of mud. No. This is Bag End, which is perhaps the finest hole in all the Shire, a sprawling, warm, round-doored home built into the side of Hobbiton Hill, filled with good furniture and too many books and maps of distant places, and all manner of gifts and curiosities collected over the course of a very long and unusual life. Bilbo is 111 years old on the day our story begins, which is a remarkable age for anyone and a truly staggering one for a hobbit. He is also somehow not visibly much older than he was 60 years ago, which people have noticed and quietly whispered about. Because hobbits do notice things and they do whisper, just not usually to a person's face. Bilbo is throwing himself a party. Not just any party, the grandest, most elaborately planned, most generously catered celebration the Shire has seen in living memory. There are fireworks, organized by Bilbo's very old and very mysterious friend Gandalf, who is a wizard, and whose fireworks are the sort that seem to be alive. Dragons that breathe actual fire and wheel through the night sky, leaving trails of golden sparks, butterflies made of light that settle briefly on children's heads, cascades of color that fall like slow rain and smell like something wonderful and indefinable. The tables groan under enormous quantities of food. There is music and dancing. The hobbits of Hobbiton and the surrounding countryside arrive in their finest waistcoats and their best dresses, and they eat and drink and are very merry indeed. And everything is exactly as a hobbit party should be, warm and full and laughing. Gandalf the Grey, it should be noted, is not a hobbit. Gandalf is a wizard, one of a small number of beings of great age and greater power who wander through Middle-earth doing, as far as most people can tell, whatever they like. He is tall, enormously tall, by hobbit standards, with a long grey cloak that has seen better decades and a wide-brimmed pointed hat that bends at the tip in a way that suggests it has its own opinions about the shape it ought to take. His eyebrows are extraordinary, thick and silver, and extravagantly expressive, capable of communicating scorn or delight or ancient sorrow or mild exasperation, often in rapid succession. His beard is long and white and slightly tangled, and his face is deeply lined in the way that some faces are lined by laughter and wind and the passage of an unimaginable amount of time. He smokes a long pipe, and his smoke rings have been known to take interesting shapes entirely of their own accord. He appears and disappears at irregular intervals that suit nobody's schedule but his own, and his arrivals are almost always the beginning of something. He is fond of hobbits in the slightly distracted way that a very complicated and busy person can be fond of something simple and good, and he is especially fond of Bilbo, and he is even fonder than that of Bilbo's young nephew and heir, a hobbit named Frodo. After the speeches and the fireworks and the food, Bilbo gives a short speech that delights everyone present for most of its duration, and then confuses and slightly offends them at the end, puts on a very small golden ring that he wears on a chain around his neck, and vanishes. Just like that. One moment he is standing on the pavilion in the warm lamplight, speaking to his gathered friends and neighbors, and the next he is simply not there. There is a flash, a pop, a murmur, and then a great deal of talking and the immediate consumption of more food, because hobbits process confusion primarily through their stomachs. Bilbo walks home alone through the evening, feeling very pleased with himself. He goes to Bag End and begins to pack. He has been planning this for a long time. He is going to leave. He is going to slip away quietly, leave everything to Frodo, and go off on one last journey, because Bilbo has had a taste of the wide world, and the wide world does not quite leave a person alone once it has had them. He packs light, or as light as a 111-year-old hobbit can manage, and he hums to himself, and he is almost out the door when Gandalf stops him. Gandalf asks, very gently but very firmly, about the ring. Bilbo's good mood shifts slightly. He has carried the ring for 60 years, he says. He found it. It is his. He calls it his precious, which is a word that, when Gandalf hears it, causes something to shift behind his eyes, something that looks like alarm quietly wearing the mask of calm. He tells Bilbo to leave the ring behind. For Frodo, Bilbo argues. The argument is brief, but carries within it the suggestion of enormous strain, the way a short crack in a wall sometimes indicates that the whole structure has been under pressure for a very long time. Eventually, and it costs him something, Bilbo takes the ring from his pocket and puts it on the mantelpiece and walks out the door. He walks down the lane and into the evening and out of Hobbiton, lighter than he has been in years, lighter, possibly, than he knew. Gandalf stands in the empty sitting room of Bag End for a long moment, looking at the ring on the mantelpiece. It is small and gold and perfectly plain. It catches the firelight and holds it. He does not touch it. He leaves it for Frodo. Frodo Baggins is, at this point in the story, a young hobbit of 33, young for a hobbit, roughly the equivalent of coming of age, with dark curly hair and large blue-grey eyes that have an unusual quality to them, a brightness and a depth that people sometimes notice without being able to say exactly why. He is clever and good-natured and fond of walking and reading and the company of his friends, and he has grown up in the warm shadow of his eccentric and beloved Uncle Bilbo, inheriting from him a taste for maps and languages and old stories that makes him somewhat unusual among the hobbits of the Shire, who mostly prefer practical things. Frodo inherits Bag End and the ring, and a great many questions he doesn't yet know he has. Gandalf is gone by the time the party ends, and he is gone for a long time. 17 years, in fact. 17 years during which the world turns. Frodo lives quietly and pleasantly in Bag End, and the ring sits in its envelope in the back of a desk drawer and is neither looked at very often nor entirely forgotten. And then one spring evening, Gandalf comes back. He comes in through the round green door, and he sits in the deep armchair by the fire, and he looks older, somehow, even for a wizard, as though the 17 years have actually added to him rather than simply passing. He fills his pipe, and he tells Frodo what he knows about the ring. The ring, and here Gandalf's voice drops to something that is not quite a whisper, but is doing the same work, is not just any ring. It is the one ring, forged in the fires of a mountain called Orodruin, also called Mount Doom, in the dark land of Mordor, by a being named Sauron. And Sauron is not just any villain. Sauron is an ancient and terrible power, the great enemy of the free peoples of Middle-earth, who was defeated long ago in a war of tremendous cost and grief, and has been ever since, slowly gathering himself back together in the shadows of the east like smoke, reconstituting into something solid and purposeful and furious. The ring was cut from his hand on the battlefield. It passed through many hands over the long years. It found Bilbo in a cave underground, and through Bilbo it came to Frodo, and now Sauron is looking for it. His servants are already abroad. The ring must leave the Shire. Tonight. Frodo sits very still for a moment and then says, in a voice that is admirably level, that he wishes none of this had happened. And Gandalf, who is old and wise and has spent too much of his long life in the company of grief and necessity, says quietly that so do all who live to see such times. But they don't get to choose that. They only get to choose what to do with the time that is given to them. It is the kind of thing that Gandalf says that sounds simple and is actually enormous, and Frodo is young enough to feel the full weight of it settling on him and old enough, barely, to stand up under it. Frodo's dearest friend is a hobbit named Samwise Gamgee, called Sam, who is the son of the gardener at Bag End and who has been the gardener himself since he was old enough to hold a trowel. Sam is shorter and rounder than Frodo, with a round, open, sunburned face and an expression of fundamental goodness so constant and unaffected that it is almost startling. He has large, capable hands and a deep attachment to the Shire that is not the comfortable attachment of someone who has never thought about it, but the rooted, deliberate love of someone who sees the beauty in ordinary things and values them accordingly. He loves his garden. He loves Bag End. He loves Frodo with a plain-spoken devotion that does not require examination or explanation, the way you love something that is simply part of the structure of your world. He also, Gandalf discovers, has been listening at the window during this entire conversation, which is the kind of thing Sam does not because he is sly, but because he was worried, and worrying manifests in him as hovering in close proximity to the thing he is worried about. Gandalf decrees, with a combination of annoyance and something that looks very much like satisfaction, that Sam must go with Frodo. Sam is so pleased by this that he nearly falls through the window. They leave that same night, Frodo and Sam, slipping out of Bag End with their packs and their cloaks, and the ring around Frodo's neck on a chain, walking down the lane in the darkness. The Shire is quiet and dark around them and very beautiful in the way that beloved things are beautiful when you are leaving them. They walk out through Hobbiton, past the mill, past the bridge, and into the countryside, and behind them Bag End sits silent and dark on the hill, and the story begins in earnest. They are joined, almost immediately, by two other hobbits who have somehow gotten wind of the fact that Frodo is leaving and have decided, without much deliberation, that they are coming too. These are Meriadoc Brandybuck, Merry and Peregrine Took, Pippin, and they are the sort of friends who appear in your life, and simply take up residence in it so thoroughly that the shape of the space changes around them, and you can no longer remember what it looked like before. Merry is the organized one, the planner, the hobbit who has quietly been stockpiling supplies and information, and has a very good map of the Shire and the surrounding region, and has been, it becomes clear, watching Frodo with concern for some time and preparing for exactly this eventuality. He has a quick, dry wit and a self-possession that sits surprisingly well on someone who is essentially just a very competent young hobbit. Pippin is younger, a little rounder, perpetually hungry, easily distracted, constitutionally incapable of keeping a solemn silence for more than about 4 minutes, and possessed of a warm and guileless charm that makes it very difficult to be genuinely irritated with him for long, though people do try. Together they are a unit, Merry and Pippin, the way that people who have known each other since childhood become a unit, finishing each other's sentences and knowing without being told what the other needs. The four hobbits travel through the Shire in the early days, and the Shire at night and at the edges of autumn is a different thing than the Shire in warm afternoon sunshine. Quieter, more mysterious, the hedgerows casting long shadows, the lanes empty, the smell of turning leaves and cold earth in the air. They cut through the fields and the old forest paths, and there are moments when the journey feels almost like an adventure in the small, comfortable sense, like a long walk with friends, and there are moments when something about the quality of the dark makes it feel like something else entirely. The first real brush with fear comes on the road. A figure in a black cloak, hooded, riding a black horse, so quiet that it seems to move without sound, passes along the lane near where they are hiding in a ditch. The horse stops. The cloaked figure turns its head slowly, as if listening or perhaps smelling, because there is something wrong about its face, the suggestion of a face that is not quite there under the hood, a darkness where features should be. Frodo feels a pull, a dreadful impulse that he doesn't understand, to put on the ring. He doesn't. The figure moves on. But the feeling of having been very close to something very old and very wrong stays with them like a smell. These creatures are called the Nazgul, or the Ringwraiths, or the Black Riders, and they are among the most terrible servants of Sauron. They were once great kings of men, 9 of them, who were given rings of power by Sauron long ago, and who were consumed by those rings over the long years until they faded from the world and became shadows, neither living nor dead, bound entirely to Sauron's will, existing only to serve and to hunt. They have no eyes as such, but they can sense the ring with a certainty that is worse than sight, and they are hunting. When a black rider passes, the animals go still, the birds stop singing, the air gets colder, the dark becomes more than the absence of light. The hobbits move with more urgency now, helped along by a remarkable figure they encounter on the road. An ancient, enormous, brown-booted, blue-hatted being called Tom Bombadil, who is singing to himself in the old forest, and it is very hard to describe what Tom Bombadil is. He is old. He is old in a way that makes Gandalf look recent. He has a yellow beard and a red feather in his hat, and he laughs almost constantly, a deep rolling laugh that seems to go all the way down through the roots of trees, and the forest responds to him as though he and it are very old friends who have agreed not to trouble each other. His wife, Goldberry, has hair like autumn leaves and water that moves and a voice like a clear stream, and their house in the middle of the old forest smells like earth and honey and rain, and the hobbits sleep there 2 nights and eat good food and feel, briefly and warmly, entirely safe. Tom Bombadil is entirely unaffected by the ring. When Frodo shows it to him, Tom puts it on, and he does not vanish. He turns it over in his fingers like it is a pretty pebble and hands it back. The ring does not seem interested in Tom either, which says something about what the ring is and what it wants, though exactly what it says is the kind of thing that takes a while to unfold. But the safety of Bombadil's house cannot last. They move on through the Barrow Downs, rolling hills covered in old grass and older standing stones, grey and mist-strapped in the early morning, the bones of ancient kingdoms pressing up through the turf, and one of those barrows swallows them. They wake in the cold and the dark inside a burial mound, draped in cold jewelry and with long swords laid across them, and there is a voice in the dark, the voice of a Barrow-wight, which is a ghost of a kind, a lingering darkness that inhabits old Grave and is not friendly. Frodo, on pure instinct, sings 3 lines of an old rhyme that Bombadil taught him, and Tom comes, crashing over the hill like something that predates the concept of fear, singing everything away. He sends the hobbits out into the sunlight, and goes into the barrow himself to deal with what's in it. And the hobbits stand in the thin autumn sunshine blinking and slightly dazed and alive, which feels like a gift. They reach the village of Bree, which is a larger settlement than anything the Shire hobbits are accustomed to, an actual town with actual men living in it, alongside a smaller population of hobbits, which is unusual enough in the world to be worth noting. Bree is old and a little worn, sitting at the crossing of two old roads, surrounded by a hedge and a gate, and it has the slightly cautious, slightly watchful quality of a place that has seen things come and go down those roads over the long years, and has learned to be politely non-committal about strangers until it sees what they're going to do. At the inn called the Prancing Pony, a large, rambling, many-chimneyed building that smells like wood smoke and ale and the accumulated warmth of too many people in a comfortable space over too many years. They are to meet a contact arranged by Gandalf. The innkeeper, a round, sweating, good-hearted man named Barliman Butterbur, has, it turns out, been sitting on a letter from Gandalf for Frodo for 3 months and completely forgot to send it, which is the sort of thing that Gandalf had apparently accounted for, given the content of the letter, which is mostly about what to do if Gandalf doesn't show up, which he hasn't. In the common room of the Prancing Pony, Frodo spots a man sitting alone in a corner, which is where the interesting and the dangerous tend to sit. This man is long and lean, with dark hair and a weathered, angular face that has the quality of something that has been outdoors in all seasons for many years without complaint. He wears a travel-stained cloak with the hood pushed back, and his boots are crossed on the table in front of him, and he is smoking a long pipe and watching the room through grey eyes that see considerably more than they appear to. There is a broken sword at his hip. He is called Strider, which is the name he uses here, and Frodo does not yet know who he really is, but Gandalf's letter does, and the letter says to trust him. Strider is, in fact, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir to the throne of Gondor and the greatest man alive in Middle-earth, though you would not immediately know it from the boots on the table. He is a ranger, one of a scattered, secretive, much misunderstood people who have spent generations quietly guarding the Shire and the lands around it, walking the old roads in the dark and the rain, fighting things back that the Shire's comfortable residents will never know about, receiving no thanks and asking for none. He is also, as it will eventually emerge, roughly 87 years old, because he is of a long-lived lineage that carries in it, distantly, something older than men, which is why his grey eyes look the way they do, like they have seen more than 87 years should account for. He is competent and terse and slightly intimidating and absolutely certain of what he is doing, which at this particular moment is taking Frodo and his friends under his protection and getting them out of Bree and through the wild country to Rivendell, because Bree is no longer safe and the Black Riders are close. The Black Riders come to the inn that night, or something that sounds like them does. The hobbits' rooms are ransacked. Strider, who had the hobbits sleep in his room rather than their own, watches this with an expression that does not change much, but conveys a great deal. They leave Bree before dawn, 5 of them now, slipping out through the back gate into the mist. The road east from Bree passes through increasingly wild, and lonely country green hills, giving way to brown moorland, giving way to country that has no name on most maps, and that has the feeling of deep age, of landscape that has been many things over the long centuries and remembers all of them. Strider leads, and he leads well, choosing paths that are not paths, finding water, reading the country with the ease of someone who has been doing this since before most people currently alive were born. He is not warm exactly, but he is present in the particular way that competent, watchful people are present, and the hobbits find that they trust him more with each day, though it takes a while before this trust extends to anything like warmth. They come to a place called Weathertop, which is a lonely hill with the broken ruins of an ancient watchtower on its crown, standing against the sky like something that gave up on grandeur a long time ago, but is still there out of stubbornness. From the top of Weathertop you can see a very great distance, which is useful, but being visible from a very great distance cuts both ways. On the summit there are signs that someone has been there recently, signs that Strider, after a careful examination, determines to be from Gandalf, who was here, who passed through, who left. But when, that night, huddled around a fire on the slopes of the hill, the Black Riders come. They come out of the dark like pieces of the dark that have decided to move, 5 of them, tall and robed and terrible, and Frodo, in a moment that he doesn't fully decide and cannot stop, puts on the ring. He sees them clearly then, sees what they are under the robes, tall, grey, kingly shapes, terrible with ancient power, and the Lord of the Nazgul drives a blade into Frodo's shoulder before Strider, shouting and swinging a torch, drives them back. Frodo pulls the ring from his finger. The night resolves into normal darkness. Strider crouches over him with an expression that is carefully not panicked and is clearly quite worried. The blade that struck Frodo was a Morgul blade, a weapon of terrible craft that leaves a splinter of itself in the wound and works inward toward the heart, and if it reaches the heart, Frodo will become like the Ringwraiths, a wraith, a shadow, nothing. This is a medical situation that Strider, skilled as he is, can only slow, not stop. He packs the wound with the leaves of a plant called Athelas, or Kingsfill, which has healing properties that respond to his particular lineage in ways that are hard to explain but extremely important right now, and he keeps Frodo moving, and the company presses on with urgency. Frodo's consciousness, over the days that follow, begins to take on a hazy, distant quality. He is feverish, and the world looks strange and very bright and very cold at the edges, and the Ringwraiths are always somewhere behind them, getting closer, and every time Frodo begins to lose hold of the world a little more, he sees them more clearly, which is not a good sign. They are joined, briefly and wonderfully, by an elf Glorfindel, one of the great elves of Rivendell, riding a white horse that moves like light over water. Glorfindel puts Frodo on his horse and turns it toward the ford of Bruinen, which is the last crossing before Rivendell, and tells the horse to run. The horse runs. The Ringwraiths pursue. There is a chase through the last miles of wild country, cold under a pale sky, and Frodo hanging on the horse's neck and barely conscious. And at the ford the horse splashes through, and Frodo turns to see all 9 Nazgul on the bank, at the edge of the water, and finds somewhere in himself the last thread of something, defiance, or stubbornness, or just the hobbit refusal to simply give up, and faces them. Then the river rises. It rises spectacularly in a roaring wall of white water that is shaped, Frodo thinks in his last moment of consciousness, like horses, rearing horses made of foam and fury, and the ringwraiths and their mounts are swept away, and Frodo falls from the saddle. He wakes in Rivendell. Rivendell, called Imladries in the Elvish tongue, is a place that does not so much exist in the landscape as exist between the landscape, tucked into a deep, narrow valley in the foothills of the Misty Mountains, so hidden and so strangely peaceful that travelers often speak of it as if they dreamed it. The valley has a river at its bottom, the Bruinen, which runs clear and cold and loud over stones, and the walls of the valley rise steeply on either side, covered in trees and the falling curtains of waterfalls, and the light in Rivendell has a quality that is hard to describe precisely, a soft and level quality, as if the air itself is resting. The buildings are built of pale stone and living wood, open to the air with wide arching galleries and bridges that span from one side of the valley to the other, and the whole place smells like clean water and something subtly floral and old, the smell of a place that has been tended with love for a very long time. Frodo wakes in a high, bright room. The ceiling is painted with autumn leaves. The bed is the most comfortable thing he has ever been in. There is, sitting beside the bed, a face of extraordinary beauty and gravity. Elrond Half-Elven, Lord of Rivendell, who is several thousand years old and looks perhaps 45, with dark hair and silver eyes and the kind of composed, considered expression that belongs to someone who has seen so much of the world that they have stopped being surprised by any particular piece of it, and have arrived at something on the other side of surprise, something like deep acceptance overlaid with deep care. He has healed Frodo, removed the splinter from the wound, and the fever is gone. Frodo is, against significant odds, fine. Bilbo is here. Old Bilbo, enormously old now, 128, very small and very white-haired and dozing in a chair in a corner of the house, but here and delighted and still himself under the age, still sharp-eyed and full of stories and happy, in the way that Bilbo has always been happy when he is moving toward the things he loves rather than away from them. He has been writing his memoirs in Rivendell and working on translations of Elvish poetry and generally being very old and very comfortable, and seeing Frodo is the best thing that has happened to him in quite some time. Gandalf is here too, and he explains, briefly and without making it sound quite as alarming as it is, that he was delayed, that he went to consult with Saruman, who is the head of his Order of Wizards, and that things with Saruman are not, it turns out, as they should be. Saruman, whose full title is Saruman the White, has a tower called Orthanc in a valley called Isengard, and Orthanc is a great dark spike of ancient stone surrounded by a ring of stone walls, and Saruman has been in his tower a long time, communing with a great seeing stone called a Parlantir, and the Parlantir has connected him to Sauron, and Sauron has, gradually, without Saruman perhaps even fully realizing it was happening, bent that great and subtle mind to his own purposes. Saruman imprisoned Gandalf on the pinnacle of Orthanc. Gandalf was rescued by a great eagle named Gwaihir, who carried him away through the sky, and here he is. Orthanc and Saruman are now a problem for later, but a very real and pressing problem, sitting quietly in the background of events like a fire that hasn't yet found the main building. Elrond calls a council. It is not a large council, but it is a significant one. gathering together representatives of the free peoples of Middle-earth who have a stake in the question of the ring. Elves from Rivendell and from the woodland realm to the east, dwarves down from their mountain holds, men from the kingdoms of the south and the north, and Gandalf, who represents primarily himself and everything that is right and good and in danger. There is also a dwarf named Gimli, son of Glóin, who is broad-shouldered and red-bearded, and has the bristling, compact dignity of a dwarf, who is very proud of being exactly what he is, and has no interest in being anything else. There is an elf named Legolas Greenleaf, a prince of the woodland realm of Mirkwood, who is tall and fair and light-footed, with long pale hair and eyes like the forest in autumn, and who moves with the fluid, unconscious grace of someone for whom physical ease is simply the baseline state of existence. These two will become important. They are not friends yet. They are not, at the moment, even particularly civil to each other, because the history between dwarves and elves is long and complicated, and several of the grievances involved are genuinely the fault of the elves, and Gimli at least has not forgotten this. The council tells a long story. Boromir tells the story from Gondor's side. Great men, great walls, a great city called Minas Tirith that stands between the world and Mordor, and Sauron pressing against those walls, and the dream that sent him north in search of Imladris, and the answer to a riddle about a sword that was broken, and the halfling and the ring. Boromir is tall and broad and golden-haired, handsome in the way of soldiers who have been tested by real things, and carry that testing in the set of their jaw and the directness of their gaze. He is proud, not arrogantly, but in the way that genuine worth sometimes manifests as pride, and he loves Gondor the way that Samwise loves the Shire, with a rootedness, a specificity, a love that has a particular smell and sound attached to it. He is not wrong about most things. He will be wrong about one important thing. He doesn't know yet. Frodo brings out the ring and lays it on the table in the courtyard of Rivendell, where the council sits in the autumn light, and the shadow of it falls over all of them. The decision reached, after long debate, is that the ring cannot be kept in Rivendell, cannot be sent away across the sea, cannot be wielded by anyone, cannot be destroyed by any force known to the free peoples of Middle-earth, except the fires of Orodruin where it was made. It must go to Mordor, into the shadow, into the fire. And then Frodo, who has been sitting very still and very quiet, and has been hoping, in some small part of himself, that someone else will volunteer, hears himself say, in a voice that is quiet and steady and surprises him slightly, that he will take the ring to Mordor. Though he does not know the way, he doesn't say it heroically. He says it the way you say something when you have understood a thing fully and there is nothing left but to do it, the way you say something when you are frightened and going anyway, which is, of course, what courage actually is. Gandalf says he will go with Frodo, and so does Aragorn, and Legolas, and Gimli, and Boromir, and Sam immediately, without hesitation, as if there was ever any question. And Merry and Pippin, whose ability to resist the momentum of a dangerous adventure has been established as essentially nil, and who feel, correctly, that Frodo is going to need people who know how to make him eat and sleep and rest, when he cannot make himself do these things. 9 walkers to set against the 9 Nazgul, the Fellowship of the Ring. There is a period of waiting and preparation in Rivendell that is very pleasant, the kind of pleasant that has an edge to it because you know it cannot last. The hobbits sleep well and eat well, and Bilbo, fumbling with old stiff fingers, gives Frodo a shirt of mithril rings, fine as woven moonlight, cold and silver, stronger than dragon scales. He gives Frodo the short elvish blade called Sting, which glows faintly blue in the presence of orcs, and which Bilbo carried in his own adventures 60 years ago. These gifts are given with the tenderness of someone who has lived long enough to know the weight of what they are asking someone to do, even without directly asking it. They leave Rivendell at dusk, going south, and the valley falls away behind them, and the stars come out, and the road is long. The plan, such as it is to travel south and then east, eventually to pass through or around the Misty Mountains and find a way into the land of Mordor, which is in the southeast, beyond a great brown wasteland called the Brown Lands and a river called the Anduin and a forest, and then a range of mountains that ring Mordor on 3 sides, and on the 4th side is the Black Gate. Simple, straightforward, absolutely fine. They try first to cross the Misty Mountains directly through a high pass called the Redhorn Gate, because going around the mountains to the south means skirting close to things that no one particularly wants to be close to. The Redhorn Gate is a narrow path high above the snowline, and in late autumn it is cold and exposed, and the wind off the heights is ferocious, and then the snow comes. Not ordinary snow. Snow that feels intentional, snow that piles faster than it should, snow that fills the pass while the sky to the south and east remains clear, as if the mountain itself has opinions about who is attempting to cross it. Caradetras, the mountain is called, and it is old and it is not friendly, and the Fellowship nearly dies on its flank, Frodo and Pippin buried to their waists, the whole company numb and struggling, before Aragorn and Boromir tear the tree from the mountain path and carry the smallest hobbits between them, and they retreat down the slope in defeat. So they cannot go over the mountains. They will go under them, through Moria. Gandalf had hoped it would not come to this. Moria, or Khazad-dûm in the Dwarvish tongue, which means the Dwaraudelf, the great mansion of the dwarves, is the grandest kingdom the dwarves ever built, delved deep into the heart of the Misty Mountains, a realm of halls and stairs and bridges and mines that goes down and down and down into the roots of the mountain. It was abandoned long ago, 300 years past, when the dwarves delved too deep and woke something old and terrible in the uttermost dark, something that came up and took their halls and has been there ever since. Gimli's people tried to reclaim it not long ago, and that reclamation did not go as planned. But the path through the mountain exists, the doors exist, and there is no better option. They go. The western doors of Moria are hidden on the face of a cliff beside a dark lake, invisible until the moon rises and strikes the rock at the right angle and reveals them in silver lines, the most beautiful stonework any of them has seen, and they stand there in the moonlight reading the inscription, "Speak, friend, and enter," while Gandalf tries password after password, and the dark lake sits very still and nobody quite wants to look directly at the surface of the water. And then Frodo understands it, not a password to speak, speak friend, speak the word for friend, melon, and the doors open. They go in, and the doors shut behind them with a sound like finality. Moria in the dark is enormous in a way that is hard to apprehend with human or hobbit senses. The ceilings of the great halls are so high they are lost in blackness. The pillars are vast beyond the reach of their small torchlight. The floors are cut stone, perfectly flat, perfectly regular, stretching away in every direction. And the silence is the silence of a place that has not been properly inhabited for 300 years. A deep, packed, expectant silence that absorbs the sound of their footsteps and gives nothing back. Gandalf holds his staff aloft, and light blooms at its tip, silver blue, reaching but not reaching the walls, and they walk through it like travelers inside a moving circle of visibility, with the darkness pressing in on all sides. 3 days they are in Moria, and the first 2 are simply very long and very dark and very tense. They sleep in a room that may have been an office or a watchtower, and Gandalf keeps watch, and at some point something knocks on the walls in the dark. A deliberate knock, 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, and Gandalf closes his eyes and his mouth goes into a hard line, and he says they must move on quickly in the morning, and nobody asks the obvious question because nobody wants to hear the answer. On the 3rd day they find the tomb of Balin, Gimli's kinsman, who led the ill-fated expedition to reclaim Moria. The tomb is a slab of stone in a room that is full of dead dwarves, not recently dead, and the record of the expedition's last days is scratched on a tablet, the writing getting smaller and more desperate as the pages go on, and it ends mid-sentence, the kind of ending that needs no further explanation. They should not have come back. They could not have known that. They came back. This is how it ended. And then the drums start. Deep in the mountain, the boom of drums, and it gets closer. And then the walls around them are full of orcs, small and grey-skinned and wild-eyed, armed with jagged blades, shrieking and pressing and coming from every direction. And there is a fight in the hall of Balin's tomb that is terrible and noisy and very frightening. And Frodo is stabbed in the side by a cave troll's spear and falls, and Sam screams his name, and then Frodo gets up, which he should not be able to do. Which Sam cannot understand until later when Frodo opens his shirt and shows him the silver-bright surface of the mithril coat, which has held. Frodo is bruised and winded and shaken. He is alive. Bilbo's gift, given in trembling hands in a warm room in Rivendell, has saved his life in the dark under the mountain. They run. Through halls and down stairs, Legolas loosing arrows as he runs, Gimli swinging his axe, Aragorn and Boromir holding the rear, Gandalf ahead with his staff blazing, until they come to a great bridge, Durin's Bridge, a thin span of ancient stone over a chasm so deep that the sound of the cave troll's spear falling takes a very long time to disappear, and below it nothing, and the bridge crossing to the far door, and on the bridge Gandalf turns, because something else is coming. Something much bigger than orcs. The sound of it alone is enough to drive the orcs back, pressing against the walls, making themselves flat, making themselves absent, because even orcs are afraid of this. And it comes out of the dark. The Balrog of Moria is old, older than the mountains. It is a Maya, one of the great spirits of the world, fallen and corrupted in ages long past, a servant of the first and greatest darkness before even Sauron, and it is fire and shadow and enormous, taller than the ceiling in the passage, its whip of flame cracking against the stone, its wings, if they are wings, spreading to fill the hall. Its body is wreathed in flame, but the flame is dark somehow, fire that eats light rather than casting it. The orcs flee from it. The Fellowship runs across the bridge, and Gandalf, who is also at his core a Maya, the same kind of being, though very different in every particular, plants his staff on the stone of the bridge and faces it. He breaks the bridge. There is a word in a language of great power, a crack, a fracture, and the bridge falls and the Balrog falls with it, and for one moment it seems that the matter is resolved. Then the Balrog's whip lashes upward as it falls and catches Gandalf around the legs and pulls, and Gandalf grips the edge of the broken bridge with one hand and looks up at them, at Frodo, at all of them, and says, "Fly, you fools, and let's go." The sound of his fall is a long diminishment into silence. They run. Out of Moria, through the eastern gates, out into the blinding, ordinary daylight, and they fall on the hillside above the gates, and Legolas, who is elvish and does not cry easily, who is ancient by the reckoning of most things present, who has seen more death than any of the others, Legolas covers his face, and Boromir weeps without covering his. And Gimli, who was prepared to grieve for his kin, but not for this specific person, sits on the rock and is very still. And Frodo cannot cry yet. He stares at the mountains, and he is trying to understand that Gandalf is gone, is below them in the dark, is not coming back, and the size of that loss is something that will take a long time to take the right shape in him. They cross into the realm of Lothlorien, the Golden Wood, the most beautiful place Frodo has ever been, will ever be. Lothlorien is an elvish realm so old and so carefully tended that time seems to move differently inside it, slower, more deliberate, as if each moment has been pressed and preserved like a leaf in a book. The trees are malorn trees, enormous and silver-barked, and in autumn their leaves do not fall but turn gold and stay, so the forest above your head is a canopy of gold even in winter, and the light that comes through is golden too, warm and clear, and the whole wood smells like nothing else. A clean, green, alive smell with something in it that is not quite a smell, more like the feeling of a smell you can't quite place, but that makes you feel safe. The elves who live here live in the branches of the trees, in platforms and houses woven into the canopy, and you cannot see them unless they want you to, which is a quality the wood as a whole seems to share. The Lady of the Wood is Galadriel, and to see her is to understand something about beauty that the word does not quite contain. She is tall and very still and clad in white, with long golden hair and eyes that are, not to put too fine a point on it, extremely difficult to look at for very long. Not because they are terrible exactly, though they can be that, but because they see everything, every particular thing about you, and the experience of being entirely seen is something that most people find uncomfortable, and a few people find, oddly, like coming home. She is old in the way that Elrond is old, but differently. Elrond's age sits on him like responsibility, and Galadriel's age sits on her like power, like the power of something that has been very carefully containing itself for a very long time. Her husband, Celeborn, tall and silver-haired and quiet, is also there and also formidable, though perhaps more approachably so. The fellowship rests in Lothlorien for a time that is both too long and too short, the way that resting in the middle of grief always is. They sleep in the trees and eat the elves' waybread, which is called lembas, and is a flat, pale cake wrapped in leaves that is filling and sustaining far beyond its size. And they think, or try not to think, and they mourn Gandalf in the way that people mourn in the middle of things, which is to say incompletely and in pieces, grief surfacing at odd moments, and then retreating again, because there is not yet enough safety to do it properly. Galadriel shows Frodo her mirror, a simple stone basin filled with water, and when you look into it you see things, and the things you see may be the past, may be the present, may be what might yet happen, and you cannot control which. Frodo looks and sees an eye, a great eye, lidless, terrible, and he nearly puts on the ring. He does not. He offers the ring to Galadriel. She is, he thinks, wise and good and powerful. She could carry this. And Galadriel takes a breath, and for one moment the something that is under the surface of her shows, vast and terrible and very beautiful and absolutely certain of its own righteousness, which is the most dangerous kind of power there is. And then it passes, and she is herself again, and she says no. She has been tempted and has passed the test, and she will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel, and this is almost sadder than if she had failed. They leave Lothlorien on boats, going south down the great river Anduin, and Galadriel gives each of them gifts. A magical cloak whose clasp bears a leaf worked in silver, a box of earth from her garden for Sam, a short elvish blade for Merry and Pippin each, a stone for Aragorn, a small phial of silver-white light for Frodo, caught starlight in a bottle, the light of Rivendell's star, which is one of the great lights of the ancient world, given to him in a quiet moment by Galadriel's quiet voice. May it be a light for you in dark places, when all other lights go out. For Gimli, who has been altered by his time in the wood, in ways he doesn't yet have words for, who found in Galadriel something he didn't expect to find. There is a strand of her hair, golden, 3 strands, which he asked for, because it was the most honest thing he could think to ask for, and which she gave because honesty is one of the things she still values most. They travel south down the Anduin, and the days on the river are quiet and cold, and the landscape on either bank shifts from the green of the north to the browner, flatter, more ominous land of the south, and the sense that they are moving towards something that cannot be delayed much longer is constant and getting stronger. Boromir grows quieter. Frodo watches him, and what he sees is not suspicious exactly, but it is concerning, a careful quality to Boromir's silence, a preoccupation, a man arguing with himself in the territory behind his eyes. They come at last to the ancient ruins of Amon Hen, a great hill above the falls of Rhoros, where the river drops in a thunderous curtain of white water into the lake below, a sound like continuous distant thunder, and here the Fellowship must decide. East, directly into Mordor, through country that is terrible and dangerous and increasingly watched, or south, to Gondor, to the great city of Minas Tirith, to strength and walls and people, Boromir's way. Frodo asks for time to think alone. He climbs the hill, and Boromir follows him. The conversation on the hill is terrible in the way that the conversation between a good person being consumed by a very bad idea, and the person they are about to harm is always terrible. Boromir is not a villain. He is a man who loves his people and his country and has decided, not wrongly given everything he knows, that the ring is the tool that could save Gondor, that Frodo should not be carrying it alone toward Mordor when it could be used, when it could help, when it could change everything, and this thought, which is Sauron's thought, which is the thought the ring wants people to think, has been growing in him since Rivendell and is now indistinguishable from his own. He reaches for the ring. Frodo puts it on. Frodo, wearing the ring, on the seat of seeing at the top of Amon Hen, has a moment of terrible clarity. He can see everything, the sweep of Middle-earth in all directions, the armies of Mordor moving in the east, the great eye turning, searching, seeking and finding, homing in on him with a terrible certainty, and there is a battle in his mind between the pressure of the eye and his own will, which is small and terrified and determined, and he tears the ring off his finger and returns to himself gasping on the stone seat in the cold sunlight. He knows what he must do. He has known, probably, since he said he would take the ring at Elrond's council. He must go alone, not to Gondor, not with Boromir, who the ring has already begun to ruin. Not with anyone, because the ring will work on all of them eventually. Boromir has proven that, and Frodo would rather walk into Mordor alone than watch it happen to Sam or Merry or Pippin or Aragorn. He goes down to the boats, and he gets in one and he starts across the river, and Sam, who knows Frodo better than anyone and who has been watching for exactly this, throws himself into the river to follow, despite the fact that Sam cannot swim, because Sam's commitment to Frodo has nothing to do with self-preservation. Frodo pulls him into the boat. Sam sits in the bow, soaking wet and entirely undisappointed with himself. On the far bank, Frodo makes one more attempt to go alone, and Sam makes clear that being sent away is simply not something that will happen, that he is going to Mordor because Mr. Frodo is going to Mordor, and that is the end of the matter. Frodo looks at this round, wet, absolutely immovable hobbit, and something in him that has been very tight for a long time loosens very slightly. He says, "I am glad to have you with me, Sam, here at the end of all things." And they shoulder their packs and they walk east toward Mordor together, and the story keeps going, but this chapter ends here, on the edge of the known world, with two small figures walking into the dark, which is, in the long view, how most of the important journeys begin. And the rest of the fellowship, Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli, are running south along the river toward the sound of fighting, because Merry and Pippin are somewhere behind them, and something terrible has happened in the woods, and there is another story beginning there, on the other shore, in the same moment, in the same world, a world that is very large and very old and very much in the middle of deciding what it will become. And somewhere far above the world, an eagle is carrying a grey wizard up through the clouds toward the light, and that story is beginning too. But that is for later. For now, the ring goes east, and two hobbits carry it between them, and the first part of the long road is over. Sleep well.